Look, I'm out of solutions here. I can speak glibly about no-fly zone, safe zone, but at this point, I just understand this administration is never going to do anything to try and rescue the Syrian people or prevent Assad, Iran, and Russia from killing everybody they want to.
Michael Weiss is a foreign affairs reporter with extensive experience covering the Middle East and Russia. He's a senior editor at the Daily Beast, a contributor to CNN, and the author of the New York Times bestseller ISIS, Inside the Army of Terror, widely viewed as the most comprehensive study to date of the brutal Islamist entity that controls a wide swath of land between Iraq and Syria. We spoke with Weiss about the limits of U.S. interventionism in the region, the Syrian refugee crisis, Russia's recent bombing of Syrian rebels, and how President Obama's ambition for a nuclear deal with Iran has exacerbated the chaos. Michael Weiss, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
It's an unspeakable, complicated mess.
Yes.
That is, it's hard to pin down at all. And you've been critical of the Obama administration
Sure.
and the international community for not acting sooner on the problem in Syria, but really what kind of action could have taken place that wouldn't have created like an analogous mess to the one we got right now?
Well, look, the historian never traffics in counterfactuals because you make a fool of yourself, right? I will say this, in 2012, 2013, hell, even in late 2011, when they started using their Air Force, it would have been fairly simple to do a no-fly zone in northern or southern Syria. You hear from the Pentagon all this bullshit about their air defense systems. I've lost track of how many times the Israelis have bombed the shit out of Syrian military installations, targeting...
They've done it recently.
Done it recently. They hit things in Damascus, for Christ's sake. And sometimes they do it without even entering Syrian airspace. You know, I've talked to defected Syrian military soldiers. I've talked to generals who'd served and fought the Israelis in the 70s. And they said, look, all of this equipment, first of all, it's outdated and defunct. It's Soviet-era stuff from the 60s, 70s. We never upgraded it. Secondly, the people operating it are morons. Third, the United States can easily work its way around it. When the Israelis bombed Assad's nuclear program in Deir ez-Zor in 2007, first they did cyber warfare, so they scrambled all the radars. Then they called Assad and they said, you can either lose your nuke program today or your whole country and your whole government today. You pick. So this idea we couldn't take on Soviet systems in northern Syria, which is not even where the buildup of anti-aircraft systems were. It was mostly in the west against the Israelis. This was just a...
So a no-fly zone would have protected civilians, and it would have...
You would have at least forestalled some of the refugee crisis, right? I mean, people are fleeing into foreign countries because they're not being attacked by jets in foreign countries. I mean, it's as simple as that. Would
Iran have seen that as an act of war, us imposing a no-fly zone?
Well, this is one of the reasons I think that we did nothing, apart from Obama's own sort of political cast of mind, not wanting to get involved in the Middle East, wanting to pull out of it. He wanted this deal so badly with the Iranians.
The nuclear deal, you think, was inspiring his decisions?
He did not want to attack any Iranian interests, be it in Iraq or in Syria or wherever. Iran took over the security services of Iraq in a slow-motion fashion at first while we were still there, and when we withdrew in a very quick, rapid fashion. And now they own Baghdad and they own southern Iraq.
What is America's culpability in all this? How are we cooperating with Iran in Syria right now?
Well, they're our de facto ally. We have provided close air support to Shia militias led by Qasem Soleimani.
So we barely have diplomatic relations with them, but we have military cooperations with them.
Well, I mean, it's deconfliction, as we like to call it, the new euphemism du jour. Right now, you have no credible, non-sectarian intercessory force in Iraq or in Syria. You don't have the 101st Airborne, you don't have the 1st Armored Division, you don't have people that Sunni tribes can warily partner with against AQI. Instead, you have Iran.
How about the Kurds?
The Kurds are not going, I mean, they have their own interests, right? The first thing the Kurds did, very smartly, when ISIS blew into Mosul in June 2014, they took over Kirkuk militarily. They had owned it more or less politically already, just by the nature of Iraqi politics, but they took it militarily.
And that's a big oil town.
Not just that. That is the Jerusalem of Kurdistan. They'll never give it back to Iraq. You know, one of the ironies of this refugee crisis, everyone says ISIS is going to smuggle in with the sort of all the Muslims that are coming over from Syria and Iraq. I've seen more evidence on social media of Iraqi Shia militiamen coming over, basically deserting the war because they're exhausted.
I want to touch on a couple of points about Syria. First, you mentioned the Free Syrian Army. John McCain was very active in promoting them as the last great hope in Syria, but very few people know who they are. Who are they?
Well, it doesn't exist. It's a catch-all term, right? There are thousands of different rebel groups and militias on the ground in Syria.
But they have a pleasant sounding name.
They have a pleasant sounding name. I mean, originally it was known as the Facebook Syrian Army because they mostly existed on social media, right?
And they were mostly motivated just by opposition to Assad.
And defense. You know, Assad's goons would come in, bust open the door of your house. If you have a wife or a sister, Shabiha would gang rape her in front of you, make you watch. They'd take your son, spirit him away to some dungeon. He'd be gang raped in prison and tortured, have his genitals electrocuted. I mean, women in Assad's prisons, they had rats shoved into their vaginas, according to people who got out, right? According to Human Rights Watch, Amnesty. So the barbarism, even though it's not being exhibited, we're not watching it on BBC or CNN because Assad's not looking to exhibit his atrocities, unlike ISIS, doesn't mean they don't exist.
So these are good optics, though, internationally for the Free Syrian Army, in that we're just normal people, we're businessmen, and we're fighting a brutal dictator.
Yes, but a lot of these guys, look, even if we classify them as Islamist, it didn't mean that they wanted to fly planes into the World Trade Center or Freedom Tower, as it now is. It didn't mean they wanted to commit terrorist attacks against the United States. I mean, they were desperate. They said, look, you know, you intervened in Libya, you told Mubarak he had to go, you did all these things, you smashed Saddam in Iraq, why can't you help us? You know, and if you don't want to give us a no-fly zone, fine, give us weapons so we can fight the regime.
What's the best argument to not back them?
Well, that we really don't know who they are, or we shouldn't trust them because the kind of government that they will build in the ashes of Assadism is not any government we want to be partnered with.
And
right?
the weapons could certainly end up in the hands of ISIS, just like the weapons we gave to Iraq.
Well, ironically, the weapons that ISIS has confiscated in the main have been American-made weapons given to the Iraqis, right?
Yeah.
Humvees, tanks, M4 rifles. I've seen all this stuff. For the first 2 years of this civil war, everyone's like, right, so you've got ISIS and you've got Assad, and they're fighting each other. No. You had Assad and you had ISIS, and both were fighting the Free Syrian Army or other rebel groups, and also killing activists and protesters. Why? Because they have a common objective. The common objective is to destroy any credible or Western-friendly or potentially Western-friendly opposition in the country. So Assad, this goes back to his original propaganda conceit. He's always wanted to create this sort of dire dichotomy. It's either me or the people who will fly planes into your buildings in New York. In fact, Jane's Defense, 2014, they came out with a report, and the top line was Assad and ISIS have been ignoring each other on the battlefield. This has to be borne in mind. Assad is not interested in fighting ISIS, and when he does, he's awful at it. That's why he loses.
What is Russia's motivation besides just propping up Assad? Could Russia be trying to bait the United States into actual fighting over Syria?
I think it took them this long to get involved because they wanted to see what the U.S. was going to do. You know, Putin is paranoid about American mission creep. So Putin probably thought that eventually the Americans will realize they have to go after my client, and they'll do a no-fly zone or a safe zone or something. He has now foreclosed on that because he's created his own no-fly zone. He's testing the Turks. His Russian aircraft are penetrating Turkish airspace and harassing Turkish fighter jets. Fox News had a thing today that they've been harassing or chasing American Predator drones in Syria. He's not looking for a confrontation, but he's basically going like this.
He's drawing a line in the sand. I mean,
and he knows we're not going to cross it. Look at what Obama said. Obama came out 3 days ago and he said two different things, self-contradictory, but remarkable. One, he said, this is Russia, Iran, and Assad at war with the majority of the Syrian people. We have no dog in that fight. We're only at war with ISIS. But then he said, we will continue our efforts to work with and build up the moderate Syrian opposition. You can't have it both ways.
Sure.
Either you cast the majority of the Syrian people, from which comes the opposition, to their fate against three militaries or paramilitaries, because you have to include Hezbollah in there, or you don't. And so this was another myth that was peddled from 2011. Putin has no personal affection for Bashar. No, he doesn't. In fact, he thinks he's probably a pussy. He wishes his brother Basil were running the show because Basil would have done what his father did. Salted the earth in the very beginning and destroyed the revolution in embryonic form. But he does not repudiate and abandon his allies. This is core to who he is. He saw how the U.S. threw Mubarak under the bus. He watched as Medvedev acquiesced to the intervention in Libya and then essentially the lynching of Gaddafi, his client. He will not have that happen with Assad, if only because of the symbolism. The true policy has been, we don't want to see this regime fall, but we want to sort of diplomatically sweep this all under the rug and solve the crisis. But we also really don't want to rock the boat with Iran, so how do we do it? So you've had this ambiguous, schizophrenic, self-contradictory policy from day one. And the Russians, the Iranians, the regime in Syria have all called us on it. This is why what's unfolding is unfolding. The one thing Obama decidedly wanted to do when he became president on the foreign policy front is It's going to wage this war of counterterrorism through special operations, raids like the one that got bin Laden in Abbottabad, cultivate human intelligence by turning people into spies, work with the CIA, all this kind of stuff. Well, if you're now a Sunni Muslim living in the region and deemed indispensable or necessary for spying on Sunni jihadists and helping the Americans track, locate, and kill them, what have you just witnessed? You have witnessed the United States just basically say, go fuck yourselves, to all of the clients and assets it's built up on the ground in Syria. Doesn't matter if you want to classify them as secular, nationalist, Islamist, or whatever. They were our guys. We have abandoned them to Russian fighter jets. They're being bombed, and we're saying, sorry, you're on your own. How is that going to affect the way that the United States wages counterterrorism operations? Look, I'm out of solutions here. I can speak glibly about no-fly zone, safe zone, but at this point, I just understand this administration is never going to do anything to try and rescue the Syrian people or prevent Assad, Iran, and Russia from killing everybody they want to. So we got another year and change of this. By that point, I can guarantee you the following. Assad will still be in Syria. He will still be in Damascus. ISIS will still be in Syria. Russia's primary objective, as I said, destroy U.S.-backed opposition and any alternative to Assad that is not Nusra or ISIS. Eventually, Russia will bomb ISIS. But they haven't really been doing it.
Well, we're going to wrap it up there. Thanks so much for talking to us.
Sure.
Michael Weiss, the author of ISIS, Inside the Army of Terror. It's a great and dense book, and clearly he is well-versed on the subject. Thanks so much for talking to us, Michael.
Thanks, my pleasure.
For Reason TV, I'm Anthony Fisher.